Good morning, all of you. This is time that we discuss Andrew Marvell, one of the leading poets who lived during the time of John Milton. He lived during the Puritan period, and he continued in the Restoration also. He was a supporter of the Presbyterian government in the beginning. He supported Oliver Cromwell and produced a poem also, Heroic Stanzas. Horatian Oda. Heroic Stanzas was produced by Dryden. And the Heroic Stanza also praised Cromwell. And Andrew Marvell's poem was called Horatian Oda. And it also praised Cromwell. So he was a supporter of the Presbyterian government. And the close friend of John Milton also. And Milton was a great supporter of the Puritan government. And he was the Latin secretary under Cromwell. And Andrew Marvell was a very close friend of John Milton and Dryden also. Very famously, we find Andrew Marvell, John Milton, and Dryden attending the funeral of Cromwell. When Cromwell was dead in 1658, John Milton, Andrew Marvell, and Dryden joined together to attend the funeral, and they were found walking in the funeral procession also. Milton was 50 years then, and Andrew Marvell was 37, and Dryden was 27, and the age difference is there. By the time Milton had become blind, so he was found clutching at the hands of Andrew Marvell while walking in the funeral procession. And Andrew Marvell worked as a copyist under John Milton. And John Milton produced his Paradise Lost after he became blind. And he dictated the poem. And the people like Andrew Marvell wrote down the dictations of Milton. Milton's daughters also assisted him in writing down the poem. And Milton dictated the poem. Mainly Andrew Marvell was always there with him. And Marvell seemed to be a very close friend of John Milton. And Marvell was born as the son of a clergyman. And he studied at the Cambridge University. And very extensively he traveled through Europe. And while staying in Rome, he met a minor poet called Richard Flecknoe, very interestingly. And he immortalized him through a poem called Flecknoe, an English priest at Rome. So he produced a poem, Flecknoe, an English priest at Rome. And the same Flecknoe has been immortalized by John Dryden through his poem, Mac Flecknoe. And Andrew Marvell actually met the man at Rome, and he was a petty poet, Richard Flecknoe. And Richard Flecknoe approached Andrew Marvell and offered him a few of his writings for Marvell to read and produce a review. He requested Marvell to read his poems and to make a review. And it was an interesting meeting between Andrew Marvell and Richard Flecknoe. And after Andrew Marvell produced a poem also, Flecknoe, an English priest at Rome. And Dryden took Flecknoe and immortalized him through his poem, Mac Flecknoe. And Marvell started his career as a tutor to the daughter of Lord General Thomas Fairfax. And I told you, Andrew Marvell was a supporter of the Presbyterian government. He supported Cromwell and produced his first poem, Horatian Ode, praising Cromwell. And after all, during the time, he served as a tutor to the daughter of a very important military officer called Lord General Thomas Fairfax. And he was a very important military officer under Cromwell. And Andrew Marvell became the tutor to his daughter and stayed at Nun Appleton House. And he produced one poem entitled Nun Appleton House, Upon Appleton House. And it was a country house poem produced by him. And during the time of Andrew Marvell, so there were country house poems produced. Ben Jonson also produced a country house poem entitled Two Penshurst. And there were poets who produced the country house poems celebrating some house where some great people lived. And Andrew Marvell produced a country house poem, Upon Appleton House. And it was the house lived by Thomas Fairfax, Lord General Thomas Fairfax. And Andrew Marvell, being the tutor to Thomas Fairfax's daughter, stayed in the same house. And he also produced a poem addressed to Thomas Fairfax, entitled To My Lord Fairfax. Andrew Marvell started writing poems while working as a tutor under Lord Thomas Fairfax. And Thomas Fairfax was a supporter of the Presbyterian government, and he was an important officer. And the best known poem written by Andrew Marvell at this time is To His Coymistress, and seemingly the masterpiece poem. And it is this poem that is prescribed for your syllabus. And at the same time, we remember that he had written a poem praising Cromwell, Horatian Ode it was called. And the full title was Horatian Ode upon Cromwell's return from Ireland. Actually, Cromwell came to England from Ireland, and his return from Ireland to England was celebrated by Andrew Marvell by writing a Horatian Ode. So in the style of a Horatian Ode. Horace was a great poet who lived in 1st century AD. And the pattern adopted by Horace is imitated by Andrew Marvell in the poem Horatian Ode. And remember, the first important poem produced by Andrew Marvell, Horatian Ode. And the first important poem produced by Dryden is Heroic Stanzas. And both in Horatian Ode and in Heroic Stanzas, Cromwell is praised. But very carefully the praise is given. Actually, Andrew Marvell and Dryden knew very well that the Presbyterian government would not last long. They were sure that there would be a change going to take place, that monarchy would be re-established. And they knew very well. In fact, they dealt in the poems in a very careful manner the subject of Cromwell. They discussed the subject of Cromwell, but in a very careful manner. And this is the delicate attitude found in Andrew Marvell. And it was one question asked by UGC once. And Andrew Marvell kept a very delicate approach towards Cromwell by writing a poem, and it was the Horatian Ode, praising Cromwell, but in a very careful manner. And he was sure that the restoration would come and that his position would become precarious, dangerous. And therefore, he was very careful in dealing with the subject. And Dryden was also very careful in dealing with the subject. And very soon, the restoration came also. The restoration came in 1660, and Oliver Cromwell died in 1658. And when restoration came, Andrew Marvell became a part of the restoration also, and he was made a member of the parliament. And he was very delicate in dealing with the political issues. And he was a politician also. Andrew Marvell was a poet, a satirist, and a politician. And he was a very careful politician, and he supported Cromwell. But when restoration came, so he changed his attitude and supported the restoration. And he was made a member of parliament, and he remained as member of parliament for almost 20 years. But towards the end of his career, he produced a literary work, the last scenes of painting. So he had produced the last instructions to a painter. It was in 1667. introduced a poem, The Last Instructions to a Painter. And actually, in that poem, he speaks about the political corruption leading to English failure. And the political corruption actually brought there by restoration. Even though he stood as a supporter of restoration and remained as member for parliament for quite a long time, say almost about 20 years. So he had in his mind, he had in his heart, so he distrust towards the monarchy. And it's this reason why he produced the last instructions to a painter, a verse satire. And a painter has been given last instructions. And so in the last instructions to painter, so he enumerates, so he enlists the various things that lead English people to their failure. And one major thing identified by him is the restoration and the rule of the monarchy. And he was a supporter of restoration, and at the same time, so he kept a grudge in his mind also. But there is always the delicacy found in Andrew Marvell, and the delicacy was question asked by Ulysses. And he actually didn't want to hurt both sides. So he remained so a compromise. Andrew Marvell was always a compromise. He supported Cromwell in the beginning, but when restoration came, he supported the restoration also and kept his friendship on both sides. So and maintained a delicate relation with both people. And he was very flexible and he was a compromise also. And during the first Anglo-Dutch War, he produced a satirical poem, Character of Poland. So lambooning the Dutch people as drunken and profane. He supported the English. And his major poem was Horatian Ode upon the return of Cromwell from Ireland. But very carefully he dealt with the subjects. And while working as a tutor to Cromwell's warden, he later became a tutor to Cromwell's warden. Formerly, he was tutor to the daughter of Lord Thomas Fairfax and stayed with him in the Nun Appleton House and produced the country house poem Upon Appleton House and produced another poem to my Lord Fairfax. And it was at the time he produced his poem to his Coymistress also, seemingly the most famous poem. And actually, Andrew Marvell started writing poems with his Horatian Odes. And it was a poem praising Cromwell. And on the return of Cromwell from Ireland, the poem called Horatian Ode. And I told you, Andrew Marvell was very flexible and he was a compromise. And he didn't want to hurt both sides. He supported Cromwell and at the same time, he supported the royalist government also. And he was made a parliament member for almost 20 years. And he was a great friend of John Milton. And he helped Milton in writing down his major poem, Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained. And he had written also a preface when Paradise Lost was published. He had produced a preface also to Milton's poem, Paradise Lost. And he had also produced another poem called Bermudas. And Bermudas was written through the inspiration he got from a friend named John Oxenbridge. And very interesting. When Andrew Marvell was serving as a tutor to a ward of Cromwell, and he worked as a tutor to Cromwell's ward also. And he stayed with a man called John Oxenbridge. And this man used to speak about his adventures in Bermuda. And Bermuda is actually a place where there was the gold rush. And people went to Bermuda for getting gold. And John Oxenbridge also went there and had many experience. And he used to speak about his experiences in Bermuda. And Andrew Marvell produced a poem also. And it is called the Bermudas. And I told you, he had produced a poem called The Last Instructions to a Painter, and it was published only posthumously, even though it was written in 1667, because the poem actually revealed the misgivings, the faults of the restoration government, the faults of the royalist government. And therefore, this poem could be published only posthumously, and he produced it in 1667. And he also produced a few mower poems, and they are called mower poems, a series of 4 pastoral poems, and written in the voice of a lover, and he is named Damon. And Damon has become an epitome. Damon. Damon is the mower. Mower is the one who cuts the grass and is in love with a girl. And she is named Juliana. But Juliana doesn't like Damon the mower. And he is a miserable lover, and a failed love affair is there. And there are 4 more poems produced by Andrew Marvell. And these are the details about the poet Andrew Marvell. And we now come to find his most important poem, To His Coymistress. It's a very popular poem. And normally we attribute ruggedness to metaphysical poets, and the poetry of metaphysical poets seemed to be very rugged, not polished. They produced a very rough kind of poetry, and they never tried to polish their poems. But with Andrew Marvell, the ruggedness is there only with regard to the subject matter. And in the presentation, so the thing is very different. The style very elegant and very graceful. And this poem, To His Coymistress, written in the format of a carpe diem poem. And we know that there are a few carpe diem poets. The cavalier poets are called the carpe diem poets. And carpe diem is a terminology given by Horace. So it's taken from Horace's ode. Carpe diem. Carpe diem means to catch the day, to enjoy life. Not to waste life, but to enjoy the time. So to enjoy the day and not to waste the time. Because so we all are supposed to be dying soon. And if we don't enjoy when we are in the prime period of enjoyment, and if we hesitate, so it's a loss. Actually, we are going to lose. So we need to enjoy life, and this is what called the carpe diem theory. Catch the day or catch the moment. And the cavalier poets wrote in the carpe diem vein. And there are a few poets like Valor, Carew, Suckling, Lovelace. And Andrew Marvell was also included in the group of the carpe diem writers, because he also produced a few carpe diem. And one good example is To His Coymistress. And To His Coymistress is written in the style of a carpe diem poem. And catch the moment is the catchword for carpe diem. And in this poem, Marvell argues against postponing the moment of fulfillment. And this is the reason why it's called the carpe diem. And he argues against postponing the moment of fulfillment in love, and that we need to enjoy life and we need to fulfill love and not to postpone the moment of fulfillment in love. And the poem actually presents a conflict between love and time. And the opening lines of the poem, had we but waited enough and time. So it's a very famous opening. Had we but waited enough and time, this coyness lady were no crime. And it seems to be very significant, the opening. And he is found addressing his lady. The poet is found addressing his lady and telling her that coyness should not be a crime, this shyness. And the lady seems to be very shy. And she has got coyness. And she doesn't come forward. And she is hesitant. She keeps herself away. And after all, he addresses the lady and tells her that if we have a lot of time, this coyness would not be a crime. But since we don't have time, the coyness seems to be a crime. So if we have enough time, the shyness on your part may not be a crime, but we don't have that much time. The poet says that if he had enough time, he would have marveled her beauty. There would have been time for him to marvel her beauty. And now very interestingly says that if he had time, he would have loved her from the very start of time. So if he had time, he would have loved her from the very start of time, say even 10 years before the biblical flood. So in Bible there is reference to the great flood. And after all, so everything being drowned, and only a few species, so the pairs of species were only saved. Noah came with his ark. So it was Noah who came with his ark and saved each species and saved them from extinction. So every species was saved, but only the models, or only the selected few are saved. And Noah saved only, so the model of all the species, and every species was saved by him. Only the pair of the species, a male and a female, were saved by him, and from there started the growth. So the world had a second beginning. So there was the first beginning with Adam and Eve, and after that there appeared a flood, and the human beings, animals all became extincted, and Noah saved each species in his ark, and then started the growth of animals and human beings and all other things. And it was the second beginning of the world. And Andrew Marwell says that if he had time, he would have praised her, he would have enjoyed and marveled her beauty from the time immemorial, say from the time of the flood, say 10 years before the time of the flood. Very interestingly, he would have marveled her beauty 10 years before the biblical flood. And in his opinion, his vegetable love, he refers to his love as vegetable love. And why it is referred to as vegetable love? Because it is a slow growing. It is slow growing love, and it is this reason why it is called vegetable love. Would grow bigger than embryos. The vegetable love would have grown bigger than embryos, because he would have that much time. He started marveling the lady 10 years before the flood. The flood actually occurred in the immemorial past, and it was the second beginning of the world. The first beginning was with the arrival of Adam and Eve, and after that there came the flood, and then human beings started a second beginning, a second life. And Noah saved each species from the flood. And the flood was caused by God, because the world came to be ruled by very dangerous and voluptuous, cruel people. So there was anarchy in the world, and God created the flood and drowned all the beings. And Noah saved each species by coming in his ark, and from there started the second growth of the creatures and human beings. And Andrew Marwell very interestingly says that if he had, this is a question actually between love and time. And he comes to say that if he had time, he would have marveled her, say from the time of the flood, say for 10 years before the flood. And he might have this much time to marvel his lady, marvel the beauty, to praise the beauty of the lady. But unfortunately, they don't have that much time. So if he has got time, he would have marveled the lady. So from the start of the universe, say from the time of the flood, or some 10 years before the time of the flood. And if he had time, he would have marveled her, and he would never have become bored in marveling here. Normally, when we marvel a thing, we will get bored by the passing of time. And the poet says that he would never have become bored by marveling the beauty of his wife, the beauty of his lover. He might have started marveling her, so 10 years before the time of the pledge. And his vegetable love, his slow-growing love, would have grown bigger than empires. And normally we know that empire extends from kingdom to kingdom. And when there are many kingdoms, we used to call it as empire. And he says that if he had time, his vegetable love would have grown bigger than empires. And he would have spent, very interestingly, he would have spent 100 years praising her eyes. And 100 years only praising the eyes of the lady. And gazing at her forehead, only for gazing, looking at her forehead and praising her eyes, he would have spent 100 years. And another 200 years would have been spent by him for praising each of her breasts. So if he had time, he would have spent 200 years for praising each of her breasts. And say 30,000 years might have been spent by him for praising each part of her body. But there is no time at all. If he had time, he would have praised his lady. So by spending 100 years only looking at her forehead and praising her eyes, and he would have spent 200 years praising each of her breasts, and he would have spent 10,000 years, in fact, praising each part of her body. And so the arithmetic that we have to remember, 100 years meant for praising her eyes and gazing at her forehead, and 200 years for praising each of her breasts, and 30,000 years, not 10,000, but 30,000 years for praising each part of her body. And if he had started praising his lady and marveling her beauty from time immemorial, say some 10 years before the pledge, he would have spent 100 years looking at her eyes and praising her eyes, and 100 years looking at her forehead, and 200 years for praising each of her breasts, and 30,000 years praising each part of her body. And she could have, say, spent, and if it was the condition, if they had that much time, she could have spent many years wandering on the banks of the river Ganges. And very interestingly, he refers to the Indian river Ganges. And if they had time, she could have wandered through the banks of the river Ganges, looking for pearls. And if they had time, she could have spent years wandering around the banks of the river Ganges, looking for pearls. And the poet Andrew Marwell now comes to say that there are pearls on the banks of the Ganges. And Ganges, he knows, is a river in India. And after all, he comes to say that if they had time, she could have wandered on the banks of the river Ganges looking for the pearls. And he could have wandered through the banks of the river Humber, contemplating poetry. So the two rivers referred to here are Ganges and Humber. And it was one question asked by UGC, and we can expect the HSSC also will be asking this question. So which are the two rivers referred to in the Coymistress by Andrew Marwell? The rivers referred to by Andrew Marwell in the poem are Ganges and Humber. And in the context, he says that if they had time, they don't have time. The problem is that it is carpe diem poem. And he actually wants to tell his mistress that there is no time at all to waste. So if they had time, so they might have spent their time wandering through the banks of Ganges and wandering through the banks of river Humber. And she could have spent her years wandering through the banks of river Ganges and looking for pearls. And he would have wandered through the banks of river Humber, contemplating poetry. And being a poet, he needed to contemplate, to meditate on the new idea to be put as a poem, contemplating on poetry. And very interestingly, he says that if he had time, he would have started marveling the beauty of his lover 10 years before the flood. And the flood actually took place years before, in the immemorial time, and there is reference only in the Bible. The Bible only says that there was a flood caused by God, and God wanted to give the people a lesson, because the people turned to become very cruel, very voluptuous, and in fact, God wanted to take action against the people and punished them by putting a flood, and it was the great flood referred to in the Bible, and it occurred in the immemorial past. And Andrew Marwell comes to say that if he had time, he would have praised the beauty of his lady 10 years before the great flood. And he would have spent 100 years looking into her, praising her eyes and looking into her forehead, and 200 years praising each breast of the lady, and 30,000 years praising each part of her body. And after all, she could have spent her time wandering on the banks of river Ganges, looking for pearls. And he would have spent his time wandering on the banks of river Humber, contemplating poetry. But human life is fleeting, and the period of youth is brief. And these were only imaginations. So this is just imagination. They imagine in the way. The poet comes to say, if he had time, his vegetable love would have grown bigger than empires, and he would have started marveling his wife 10 years before the flood, and might have spent 100 years looking into her eyes and forehead, and 200 years praising each of her breasts, and 30,000 years praising each part of her body. But unfortunately, there is not that much time. Human life fleeting, and period of youth brief. Therefore, it is better for the woman to engage in love. And therefore, he comes to tell the lady that she should have to engage in love before wombs take away her virginity. So she actually wanted to keep up her virginity, and she wants to remain a virgin. And therefore, she is hesitant. So in joining with the poets and in consummating love. So she is reluctant in joining with the poet and consummating love to engage in sexual passions. And the girl is reluctant. And therefore he comes to tell the girl that the time is fast moving and life fleeting and youth is brief. And if the woman hesitates to engage in love, that her body will be eaten by worms, that her virginity will be eaten by worms. So it is better for the woman to engage in love. So he reminds the lady that it will be better for her to engage in love before worms take away her virginity. And if she is too shy, if she is too reluctant and hesitant, so in fulfilling the love, in joining with the poet to consummate love, if she is very shy, her desire will tend to become ashes. And therefore now is the time for making love, and the word now is presented in the poem in capital letters. And now actually it is the youth. It is the time for making love. And there is no question of enjoying romantic love after death. And he also comes to say that there is no possibility of enjoying romantic love after death. So the grave is a fine and private place. And he comes to speak so in a very open manner that the grave is a fine and private place, and there is no one coming to disturb you when you are in the grave. So no one will come and disturb you, and you will be asked to do no work in the grave. And the grave is actually a private place, it's a safe place. But there is no possibility. The one and only shortcoming of the grave is that there is no possibility of embracing. The one and only shortcoming of the grave is that there is no possibility of enjoying physical love. And the grave actually is a fine and private place. But there is no possibility of enjoying sexual love, physical love. And there is no scope for embracing. But none can embrace there. And a very noted line in the poem. This is a very noted line, and the same idea is presented in a poem written by John Donne also, called Blossom. And there also we come to find John Donne speaking about enjoying love, and if love is not enjoyed, they are going to lose their life. They will become dead, and after death there is no possibility of enjoying love. And now he comes to say that the grave is a fine and private place, but there is no chance to embrace. And this poem to his Coymistress was written before 1660, and it was published only in 1681. So it was written during the Puritan period, during interregnum, and it was at the time Cromwell was there. And Andrew Marwell served under Cromwell. So he served as a deputy to John Milton. John Milton was the Latin secretary, and Andrew Marwell was his deputy, working in the same office. And Andrew Marwell also assisted John Milton in writing down his poems, because by the time Milton became blind. And he was a close associate of John Milton. And he produced this poem to his Coymistress before the Restoration, before 1660. But the poem published only in 1681. And there are 46 lines written in iambic tetra. So in the poem we come to find iambic tetrameter. Tetra actually refers to 4 words with the 8 syllables. Iambic tetra. And the words are all iambic. So there will be 2 syllables in each word. And they are the iambic, and the stress is given at the end. And there are 4 iambic words in each line. And it is this reason why it is called tetrameter. Iambic tetrameter. And the rhyme scheme is AA, BB, CC, DD. And the rhyme scheme is AA, BB, CC, DD. And this is the scheme followed in the poem. There are 46 lines, and the lines are written in iambic tetra, and the rhyme scheme is AA, BB, CC, and DD. And there are many metaphors used in this poem, many similes and metaphors. Very interestingly, one of the metaphors is, my vegetable love should grow faster than empires and more slow. The speaker compares his love with vegetables, and vegetables are supposed to be increasing only slowly with time. And therefore he comes to say that his love is a vegetable, a kind of vegetable love. And by the passing of the time, and if he had time, he would have used thousands of years praising the lady, and the vegetable love might have grown bigger than empires. And a metaphor is used there. Love compared to vegetable love. And there are a number of simile also employed by him in the poem. And here in the sentence, therefore, while the youthful hue sits on the skin like morning dew. So in the opinion of the poet, the youthful hue, so the beauty found on the skin of people, so will be lasting only like a drop of dew. And the period, the beauty will remain is like the period that a dew drop will remain. Short living. Beauty is short living. It will remain only for a limited time, like a dew drop. And similarly employed here. Beauty compared to dew drop. Like a morning dew. And when the sun grows, when there is the sunlight and sun rises, the dew will disappear. and beauty also will become disappeared. And there are also personifications used in this poem. Example, so he refers to time's winged chariot. Time's winged chariot hurrying near. And time is here personified as sitting in a chariot. Time's winged chariot. Time is personified here. So a thing is produced as a person, and this is what called the way of using personification. And time is compared to a person sitting in a chariot. Time's winged chariot. And there are metaphors, similes, and personification, and many techniques adopted in this poem. It's a very popular poem produced by Andrew Marvell, and a theme from the poem, well enough and time, and it is taken from the first line. So the first line is read as, had we but well enough and time. So if we had well enough, well is very short. Actually, the life of a person is very short. So if a person's life concerned in the earth is very short, it is to be said as the world is short. If there is well enough and time, this coyness lady, and the lady is very coy, very shy. And she doesn't actually come forward to consummate love with the poet. And the poet invites the lady to come and to consummate love with him, to come and enjoy life, to come and enjoy physical love. And this is the request of the poet. The poet requests his lady to come join with him to enjoy physical love. And he wants her to come and consummate love. And this is a very controversial poem also at the same time. There is open sexuality found in this poem. And in the poem, there is reference that if he had time, he would have marveled each breast of his lady using 200 years. And sexuality is openly referred to in the poem. Therefore, the poem was published only late in the career of Andrew Marvell, even though he produced the poem before the Restoration, 1660. He could publish the poem only in 81, taking some 21 years. And he produced the poem early in his career, and he could publish the poem only in 81. And during the Puritan period, there would be no possibility of publishing a poem like this, that a poet could write such a poem and keep it in his cupboard. He is not permitted to publish such a poem, even though so he was a supporter of the Presbyterian government. And John Milton also became offended with the Presbyterian Licensing Act. So there was the Licensing Act introduced by the Presbyterians when John Milton started speaking about so divorce and the principles of wedding. So the Presbyterian government introduced the Licensing Act, and against the Licensing Act, Milton produced an essay, Areopagitica. And there was the question of the Licensing Act, and Andrew Marvell could not have published the poem during the interregnum, and he could publish the poem only during the Restoration. He published it only in 1681, and so it seemed to be a very controversial poem. And there are many themes adopted from the poem by various writers. And very interestingly, Robert Penwarren, and we remember the name of Robert Penwarren. Penwarren was a new critic in the group of the new critics. So in the area of new criticism, we come to find Robert Penwarren, Cleon Brooks, Robert Penwarren, Crow, John Crow Ransom. And Crow Ransom was the person who started new criticism, and he produced a book also called New Criticism, and from there started the new criticism movement in 1950s in America. And Robert Penwarren was also there, and Penwarren had used as title for his novel the theme taken from Andrew Marvell's Coymistress. Robert Penn Warren. Remember, Robert Penn Warren was a great American new critic. And he had produced novels and poems also. And for a novel, he had adopted title from Andrew Marvell's poem, and it is Well Enough and Time. Well Enough and Time is a novel written by Robert Penn Warren, one of the important new critics in America. And actually, the title for his novel is taken from the poem of Andrew Marvell, entitled to his Coymistress. It's taken from the first line. The first line can be read as this: had we but well enough and time, if we had enough word and time, this coyness lady would not be crime. And it would not be a crime if the lady shows such a hesitation, such a shyness, such a coyness. And there is coyness found in the lady. And he comes to say that if they had time and enough word, the coyness would not be a crime. But they don't have that much time, and therefore coyness is now a crime. And if the lady hesitates, what actually is going to happen? Her virginity will be eaten by worms, and her desire will turn to become ashes. And even though the grave is a fine and private place, there is no chance to embrace that. She should remember always this thing and should come with the poet, in fact, to enjoy physical love, in fact, to consummate love with the poets. And these are the things we come to find from the poem To His Coymistress. And thank you for time.